All right, let's get underway. I think, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome along to our maximum production webinar this evening for the Holstein Friesian Association. And today we're very, very fortunate to have Mr. Paul Mulligan, who works for Fonterra as projects manager. That's his title. I'll just give you a little bit of a rundown on Paul. He's just told me off air he's been basically involved for 70 odd years in the industry. So when he first started,
70.
Well, not quite 70, no, sorry, 70s, sorry. Yes, sorry. Thank you, Paul, for reminding me that. I might be getting a bit of Alzheimer's myself. After traveling for a couple of years in the mid-80s, Paul did short stints in medical research and the meat industry. After the latter convinced him to there had to be a better place, Paul entered the dairy industry. Over the next decade, he held various production and technical positions, mostly focused around cheese and manufacture. Subsequently, Paul moved to an operation position in the USA, during which time the New Zealand Dairy Board and New Zealand Dairy Group and Kiwi became Fonterra. On moving back to New Zealand, he was involved in implementing the first Fonterra SAP system, followed by various managerial and commercial roles. After a brief stint outside Fonterra, where he lived in Germany for about a year, he returned to do a 3 to 6 month project for Farm Source. That got extended to 10 years, so he must be would have been doing a fantastic job. His current role is milk supply team, where he works closely with the commercial group who manage the milk price. He has no farms or cows, but I tell you what, he has a lot of generational background, as he is a third generation dairy farmer in his family, and his brother is still milking in Ashburton Way, I think, at the moment. His interests include fishing, walking, hunting, building things. He's even got a brewing, so he might be a bit of a home brewer. So welcome along, Paul, to this webinar this evening. And what we're going to be talking about, or Paul's going to be talking about rather than me, is the introduction on lactose payment to farmers, Fonterra farmers. So there's lots of dynamics that's gone into this. It's been on the table for many, many years, and I'm sure that Paul is going to enlighten us around the reasoning for it, why, and how it's calculated. So welcome along this evening on this glorious winter's evening, Paul.
Thank you very much, Selwyn. Good to be here. That 3 to 6 month project that turned into 10 years, I refer to that as being recaptured by the vortex. Fonterra can be a bit like that sometimes. Just for some context and a little bit of structure here, I'm going to talk initially about the milk price and how it's calculated, and then I'll move on to how we divvy up the milk price in terms of the fat, protein and lactose payments. And along the way, I'll describe some of the history and the reasoning as to why lactose has been introduced. To be fair, we haven't had a massive amount of feedback or question from the farming community in a broader sense. What we have had tends to focus around two questions, and that is why and why now. So I'll try and touch on those in a little bit more detail. As much as possible, I like to keep these things conversational. So if you have a question, please just interject or put a note in the chat function on this webinar, and Selwyn will interrupt me on your behalf. The milk price, or the base milk price, farm gate milk price, call it what you will, is determined through the sale of products on GDT and off GDT, and it really defines the size of the overall pie that we've got to divvy out. And it's denominated in kilograms of milk solids. And when we think about the milk price, we always think about dollars per kg MS. The products that Fonterra manufactures are broadly described on this graphic. Now, it's a bit busy and it uses lots of three-letter acronyms, which we specialise in, but I have expanded them out for the purposes of clarity here. We have inherited from the legacy companies that make up Fonterra a pretty wide-ranging portfolio of products and some pretty capable manufacturing facilities across the country. The bulk of the milk goes into the products on the left, being whole milk powder, skim milk powder, butter, anhydrous milk fat, or AMF, and buttermilk powder, BMP. The products to the right, the cheese, casein, caseinate, and milk protein concentrate, are more specialised in nature, both in terms of their applications and their markets. We tend to sell protein products like casein and caseinate and milk protein concentrate into the US, and whey protein concentrate. Cheese covers quite a variety of different products. Casein and caseinate end up in all sorts of applications, from glue through to high-end nutritional products. The note at the bottom of this slide refers to the reference commodity products. They're inside that box. Now, if a product is a reference commodity product, then sales of that product inform the milk price. So if you hear commentary that cheese prices are very strong or milk protein concentrate prices are very strong, then do not translate that into the milk price will go up, because those products do not have any influence on the milk price. Whole milk powder, skim milk powder, anhydrous milk fat, butter, and buttermilk powder are the only products that feed into the milk price. Now, the reason for this is that those products are, by and large, broadly traded internationally, and they are subject to international standards under Codex. And in theory, you can buy a skim milk powder from Australia or South America or North America or Europe, and it should be roughly equivalent to a product generated here in New Zealand. Similarly for whole milk powder, certainly the casein and anhydrous milk fat, because it's essentially pure butter fat. Butter comes in a couple of varieties, but still broadly and widely traded. So price discovery becomes something that we can do with good effect in that space. And so that defines the baseline or commodity value of the milk that is supplied to Fonterra. And as an extension of that, it becomes a benchmark for all the other processors who collect milk across the country. Almost without exception, there is reference to the farmgate milk price in one form or another in the independent processors' milk payments. I'll draw a little line under Tatua. They don't reference ours. They're a fellow co-op, and their business actually is very, very skewed towards the right-hand side of this picture. They generate a lot of value out of high-end caseins and caseinates and whey protein concentrates. If we zoom into the next slide, it attempts to illustrate why lactose becomes important. The breeding programs in New Zealand have been incredibly successful over many, many decades in producing what I refer to as an atypical milk composition. We now have cows that produce relatively high levels of fat and relatively high levels of protein and relatively low levels of lactose. So if we were to manufacture skim milk powder, for instance, from just directly from the milk that we collect off farm, we would be significantly above the specification target for protein, which means we have the opportunity to standardize our milk powders, and this applies to both whole milk powder and skim milk powder, by purchasing imported lactose to standardize the protein. It effectively acts to dilute the protein down to the codex level. And put in very simple terms, that enables us to buy a product which is typically with the order of $1,000 a metric ton, and convert it into something that's worth typically between $3,000 and $4,000 a ton, which is quite a good deal. However, it does come at a cost, and the lactose that we purchase is a direct cost to the milk price. And the assumption here is that we have to import all of the lactose for the notional processor. So the notional processor is only allowed to make these products inside the box, and there are no other sources of lactose. So whilst in reality, in real Fonterra, we only purchase about 30,000 odd tonnes of lactose a year on the international market, the notional processor has to purchase circa 400,000 tonnes of lactose. And so it has a cost in the milk price of about 40 cents per kilo of milk solids. The milk price, as I've just described, references the RCPs, and the resultant pool of funds is divided by the milk solids, which is still defined as fat and protein. So with the introduction of lactose, the definition of milk solids remains fat and protein. And there's a couple of reasons for this. The first one is that they do represent the most significant value portion of milk. And the second one is that it would be heinously difficult to change the definition of milk solids because it's embedded in DIRA, or Dairy Industry Restructuring Act, which was passed back in 2001 to enable the formation of Fonterra. So getting Acts of Parliament amended is fraught and is a pretty long-term proposition. And in the end, we actually didn't need to do it. So the upshot of all this is that the introduction of lactose as a payment parameter does not change the calculation of the farm gate milk price. Now, in the next few slides, I'll describe how the introduction of lactose, just like the differential payments between fat and protein, is an approach to a distribution of the milk price to take what is an average milk price expressed assuming that the milk composition is the average composition across all farmers supplying Fonterra, into a more fine-tuned milk price that reflects the relative values of fat, protein, and now lactose in each individual farm's milk. Now, I'll just pause there. If there are any questions, please feel free to come off mute or pop those questions into the chat. No questions?
Questions by the look of it.
Okay, cool. Could be a quick hour.
Doing a good job.
Okay, so milk payment parameters, call this cutting up the pie. Now, this is where we get into how we pay for fat, protein, lactose. The volume adjustment piece fits in here as well. So going back to those questions that we have seen most regularly asked of us around this change, what is different this time? Why have we introduced it, and why now? So the first part of that is, why have we introduced it? When we look at the history of payments versus what each individual farm's milk would yield in terms of a payment for the milk price, right? We see a discrepancy, and that discrepancy is relatively consistent over those 16 years. And I'll show you a graphic that highlights what that looks like. And when we modelled paying for lactose at a number which approximates $1 per kilo, we saw a slightly greater than 50% reduction in that discrepancy. And the discrepancy that we observe, which is not massive, it's plus or minus 7 odd cents for 10% of farmers. The impact at the outer ends of the bell curve in terms of on-farm profitability are material. 7 cents doesn't sound like much, but if your operating profits $1 a kilo of milk solids at the end of the year, then it's 7 cents, 7%. And I certainly wouldn't like to find out that I'd had a 7% pay cut. So there was an overwhelming desire to ensure that we understood the magnitude and the contributing factors to this discrepancy in an attempt to determine if it was material enough to implement a change in the interests of being fair and equitable to all supplying farmers in the co-op. Just move off that. This graphic shows the data that we analysed between 2009 and I think it was 2023 on this graphic, and it shows the relative consistency of we call them the deltas. It's a bit sort of confusing, but the first thing to appreciate about this graph is it graphs out the 5% of farmers, roughly 400 farms, at either end of the bell curve. And what it shows is that the high protein group were on average 7 cents under rewarded, and the high fat group or the high solids group were roughly 7 cents over rewarded relative to the value that was generated by converting those solids into the reference commodity products. As with any population, we see a distribution, and this is the distribution. So the vast majority of people are in the centre of the distribution and are totally unaffected by any payment that we do for lactose, because they are at the average. What we're interested in are the people who are at the left and right of this diagram, who, as in the earlier slide, represent 5% at either end, and determine what the magnitude of that deviation is. And you can see that whilst the average deviation is circa 7 cents, we do have representatives in that group who are either more than 10 cents over rewarded or more than 10 cents under rewarded. Okay. Well, to put it another way, and this graphic highlights the relative precision in the observed impacts that we see here. The variation that we see is almost perfectly correlated with the lactose to protein ratio. The correlation coefficient, or the R squared, is 0.99. One is perfect. Anything more than 0.8 is considered statistically very significant. So we are very much approaching a perfect correlation here. And essentially what this says is that if you have relatively low lactose and relatively high protein, the milk price has to buy more lactose. Therefore, the cost to make that product is slightly higher. And similarly, if you have a slightly higher lactose to protein ratio, then the milk price has to buy less lactose, and therefore your value per kilo of fat and protein is slightly higher. Now, I've got to really stress here that using dollars per kgms as the only metric to measure overall value is quite dangerous. We have modelled up numerous scenarios where we produce a higher dollars per kilo of milk solids, and in some of those scenarios we do that by reducing the amount of protein that a given farm produces, and whilst it generates a higher dollars per kilo of milk solids, it generates a lower dollars per cow or dollars per hectare, right? So this is the old don't get sucked in by a single metric situation. And it's also why we don't believe that any rational players in the milk production business will blindly chase lactose. Put pretty simply, why would you put a kilo or a unit of energy into producing a kilo of lactose at $1 per kilo when you can put that towards producing either fat or protein at roughly $9 a kilo? Seems like a bad deal, right? But we've certainly had some very interesting propositions put to us around the sorts of behaviour that this introduction of a lactose payment might drive. And again, I get back to, we have to assume a rational response. We can't model irrational responses. And I'm very hopeful that those said irrational responses won't materialise.
So, Paul, I guess the reason this has come about, and just in a quick nutshell from where I'm sitting here, is that Fonterra, we're up until maybe this year, last year, whatever, we're buying in 300,000 tons of lactose. Now that's been reduced because of the lactose that the farmers here are able to produce, and you're able to extract from the milk that's supplied from our farmers. Is that sort of correct?
No, it's a little bit more theoretical than that, Selwyn. That we're not looking to change what we do in terms of how the milk price is constructed, and we're not looking to encourage farmers to produce more lactose. All we're trying to do here is recognise that not all farmers have exactly the same lactose to protein ratio. Without getting into the technicalities of it too much, although I would enjoy it, when we talk about a payment for fat and a payment for protein, historically, the value of the lactose was rolled up in the value of the protein. And in fact, whilst the protein value that you will have historically seen was expressed as $1 per kilo of protein, it was actually in the solids non-fat, or all of the solids in the milk that are not fat, the value of that divided by the protein. And it was assumed, and by and large correctly, that protein was a good proxy for the total solids non-fat in the milk. Now, all we've done by introducing a lactose payment is we've split the solids non-fat portion of the milk into the two components, being protein and lactose. And by doing that, we've been able to recognise the different milk compositions at a finer level of detail. The notional processor will still have to purchase between 300,000 and 400,000 tonnes of lactose, and the milk price will still incur that cost. This is more about recognising that a farmer with a high lactose to protein ratio actually doesn't incur as high a cost. Now, they may have less protein and they may be slightly less profitable overall, hence my comment about, measure profitability in dollars per cow or dollars per hectare, not dollars per kilo of milk solids. And there are some others who have lower protein, lactose to protein ratio, who incur slightly higher costs. So we're not expecting to get less or more lactose in the milk, and we're not expecting the milk price to source lactose differently from how it has done in the past. It's a very theoretical model. The real Fonterra has internal sources of lactose, being the crystallized lactose from cheese and casein waste streams, and the permeate from the manufacture of milk protein concentrate. So we do harvest a lot of that lactose internally, but the milk price notional processor can't do that.
So a lot of our farmers are, I guess in the last 10 years, maybe slightly more, have gone into, in their breeding philosophies and things, have been looking at protein with in their breeding selections of protein BVs of bulls, etc., that are historically producing more in their offspring, more protein. So I guess that basically wraps up that if our farmers are still choosing to advance their protein, like percentage and their kilograms of protein, that seems to me, the way you're talking, will have a benefit through the lactose.
Not universally, no. There are a few correlations with. It's a complex system. You breed for something, you get something you do want and something you don't. What we've seen in the herd over the last 15 or 16 years is we've seen a gradual increase in protein. We've seen a gradual and recently quite a rapid increase in fat percentage, but we have seen a gradual and relatively small decline in the amount of lactose across the board. Right? Now, the biggest impact on milk composition, no surprise to you, will be it's breed and feed. Right? And the gradual decline is a breeding, and I'm not talking about a specific breed of animal here, I'm talking about breeding in general. It's a result of breeding pressure in response to the relatively high values of fat and protein feeding into the national breeding objectives. So those relatively high values of fat and protein have encouraged the breeding of cows that produce high levels of fat and protein. And one of the, I call it a casualty, one of the casualties of that approach has been this gradual decline in the amount of lactose. So high fat and protein milk if I can give you some context around that, over the last 10 years has decreased the unit milk price by roughly 7 cents, between 5 and 7 cents per kilo of milk solids. Now, again, to balance that out, whilst the per unit value may have been depressed by that, the extra kilos of fat and protein being produced from a given amount of feed and a given number of cows has way more than compensated for that reduction in lactose.
Noting the litres are dropping as well, and like the protein and the fat percentages are getting higher.
Yeah. So the volume adjustment is an economic signal that encourages the production of generally high solids milk. But if you've got a higher percentage of fat and a higher percentage of protein, and as I mentioned, the percentage of lactose has drifted down, but it's in the small decimals. The thing that gives is the water, right? So we've moved, or you have, farmers and breeding companies, etc., have moved the dial quite significantly on that over the last 20 or 30 years. I've only got data that goes back about 16 years.
Yeah, you sort of go back to the old town milk days. It was just litres of milk, wasn't it? Irrespective, basically, it's because they were just producing, raw milk.
Yeah, if I hark back to the early 90s when I started in the cheese plant at Clandyboy, at the peak of the season, we were typically getting milk at about 3% protein. If you look at the catchment there now, it's 3.8, 3.9%. So with tiny steps, but this breeding game has produced, repeating what I said earlier, an atypical milk compared with the rest of the world. Most of the rest of the world focuses on litres, and they have a standard composition. Because we have to take the water out of the milk by and large, we're focused on solids. And that focus on solids feeds into the attributes that are considered desirable in terms of breeding, and that has resulted in a shift across the whole herd. It's not isolated to any one breed. It's just the general population has moved in that direction.
There must be some questions out there if someone wants to type something in, or Kelly could possibly unmute you or something. Or unmute yourself. Is there any questions out there for Paul? Because I'm sure he's covered all bases pretty well. But
I've still got a couple more slides.
Yeah. No, that's good so far. We will just, I think it's totally interesting to see, where the dynamics is because I've always been a naive kind of person, thought it was just all of a sudden you're going to be paying for lactose and this is going to be gung-ho sort of thing. But it to me, you've brought out that it's a composite makeup of those milk solids with the lactose being in there.
Yeah, in all of our communication, we've been hopefully very clear that we actually don't want to see anybody do anything about this, right? The potential for a negative outcome if you suddenly started chasing lactose would be quite high, and I'm talking at a farm level, right? In the long term, if we saw an increase in the amount of lactose at the expense of fat and protein, then that has the potential to make the pie smaller. And I'll touch on that in a little bit more detail after this slide, because I'm trying to cover the why here, and the next thing I'll cover is the why now. So this graphic should really be viewed alongside the slide that's to prior. And it really just highlights how much the distribution tightens up. Now, we haven't completely got rid of the distribution. There are still elements of variability in any population that we'll, never get rid of. But we've moved from having outliers at greater than 10 cents per kgms to the vast majority now being in that sort of plus or minus 2 to 3 cents type range. And in terms of the people who were in the middle of the previous distribution, they're still in the middle of this distribution. We're really just tucking the tails in of these normal distributions and trying to tighten up the payment to be a little bit fairer and a little bit more precise. Right. So what is different this time? Some of you may have heard of a genetics consultancy company called Abacus Bio, who have consulted to NZAEL, New Zealand Animal Evaluation Limited, which is a subsidiary of HFNZ, for many, many years. And the frequency with which we carry out a broad examination of our payment parameters is roughly every 10 years. And this last one commenced in 2024. The previous one was 2014. And at that time, it was determined that this deviation, this misalignment that I've mentioned in the earlier slides existed, but the counterbalancing risk isolated, particularly by Abacus Bio's work, was that there was a real risk that paying for lactose would in fact drive negative outcomes across the whole milk pool. And so you had this, okay, do we do something about it? This known discrepancy, and the feeling at that time was, based on the advice that was received, there was a real chance that we would end up in an overall value destructive scenario. And so in 2014, the board elected to not implement a payment for lactose. When we commenced the 2024 review, we went back to Abacus Bio with the 2014 report and said, can you please repeat this report with whatever new data is available? Fully expecting that they would come back and give us the same answer. They didn't. They came back and, in fact, changed the direction of their advice to us based on two things. Firstly, a much broader data set than they previously had access to. A lot of science gets done in 10 years. And the second one was a more focused data set around the New Zealand scenario. Now, one of the principals at Abacus Bio said to me, and I don't believe it was tongue-in-cheek, some of our earlier work was based on a forecast study out of the United States in 1970. And that is not a particularly robust data set to be using. However, if it's the best you've got available, then you have to use it. And so I don't hold them responsible for having used a data set that looked like that if it was the only one that was available to answer that particular question. But the science had moved on. And so instead of indicating that there would be a negative impact on total milk value over time, they indicated a 0 to slight positive impact on total milk value over time. Now, this assumed a low lactose value, which is in that range of about $1 a kilo. And the reason behind their sort of change of analysis was that the new data indicated that the increase in total protein produced by dairy cows was being impeded by the requirement to make low moisture milk, in other words, high solids milk. And if you took some of the pressure off the requirement for high solids, then in fact you would end up with more. You'd end up with runnier milk, but you'd end up with so much more of it that you actually ended up with more solids. Hopefully that made sense. It sort of roughly made sense to me. But it's a bit of a challenge to explain how you can have, you have lower percentages, but you have more in total milk solids. And it was largely around protein. There is the potential to have slightly less fat over time, but the notional processor, the manufacturer of whole milk powder and skim milk powder, as I described earlier, is a protein limited business. It's not a fat limited business. So we could end up actually making the pie slightly larger if we take some of this negative volume pressure off. And to be clear, lactose and volume are so tightly related to each other that paying for lactose has the effect of being a negative version of the volume charge.
See. Jock Cummings is typing something. So going back quite a few years, we just had the fat payment, didn't we? And then we brought in the protein payment, and then we've escalated, well, not escalated from there, and those two are balancing each other. I guess at times you paid more for protein than you had, not more for protein, but yeah, the protein certainly made a huge difference to the farmers, isn't it? Their payments.
Yeah. So that move away from using butterfat, old terminology, as the sole determinant of what milk was worth, was as much as anything a reflection of the movements in our product mix. Now, to go back 100 years, we made butter and fed the skim to the pigs, and a few lucky companies made cheese, and the fat was a reasonable proxy for the value of the milk. With the evolution of skim milk powder and whole milk powder being a much more significant proportion of our product mix over time, the payment for protein made sense. And then, as you'll all be aware, up until about 8 years ago, protein was worth, on average, roughly twice as much as fat.
Yep.
In recent times, we've seen a resurgence in demand for butter in particular, but it flows through to anhydrous milk fat. And so we've seen that sort of flip on its head. And if I think in terms of the value ratios that we use to historically determine the ratio of the value between fat and protein, we're seeing fat values now roughly 50% higher than the corresponding protein values.
Yeah. I think Jock was typing something. What's coming up? Fonterra going to pay for lower cell count suppliers?
Certainly not on my radar screen. We sort of do, because we tend to penalise the ones who are high. So you could view it as a positive for everybody who's low. But no, there is no plan that I'm aware of, right? My scope of activity isn't universal by any means. But no, I'm not aware that that's going to happen.
Okay. Thank you, Jock, for that. Any more questions out there, please type them in. Obviously, you're doing a great job there, Paul, explaining everything, and no one can challenge you or argue with you.
Well, there's two possibilities. I've either explained it well or I've just confused everybody.
No, I think you explained it well. It's like, like the facts are the facts, and probably it's been enlightening for me because I thought all of a sudden there's going to be great payments for lactose, and then all of a sudden people are going to be trying to swing into producing higher producing lactose cows and looking at bull summaries, but there's no BVs for lactose in our New Zealand bull systems. There is a few overseas. I think they do have a lactose graph in there, but New Zealand doesn't. So I know you said to me when we talked a few weeks back, whilst you've got black and white cows in the background there, which is really nice, and thank you for doing that. To you, because of your job and what is, you wouldn't care if they were all painted and cows were all grey painted army colours sort of thing. It's
Battleship grey, yeah.
Battleship grey. That was the word I was looking for. That's what your what you Fonterra want is the quality of milk, and we believe our Holstein breeders. I'll put my Holstein Friesian hat on here now. We believe we have the cows that produces that great quality milk that Fonterra wants to get and be profitable farmers. And I know you were saying before that could be a 7 cent margin either way, but I guess over 100,000 milk solids, $7,000 is $7,000, isn't it, in this day and age? And it's a little bit like the cooperative difference in things. All those things do add up to the balance sheet at the end of the year.
Yeah, and I think getting back to that point around profitability, there are many other things in a complex farming environment that are within your control that you need to focus on to ensure profitability, that come way up the list from focusing on lactose. And so what we have tried to do with other stakeholders, and we've been in contact with LIC and CRV, HFNZ, etc., for the best part of 18 months now, talking about how this particular change is woven into the breeding objectives. And yes, you're right, there is no lactose breeding value. They elected as an expedient, and to my earlier comment that lactose and volume are very tightly related, to make an adjustment to the volume component to recognise the payment for lactose. And in doing that, they also ran before and after type scenarios in terms of the top 20 bulls. And there were, for this last year, I don't think any of the top 20 changed. There were some changes in the order. So the impact in terms of size, sire rankings, has been very minimal. So again, there's, I think it's good to understand the wheres and the wherefores and the history of how we've got to a situation where we're paying for lactose. It is very motivated by a desire to be fair and equitable, and it's not a lot to do with trying to drive change in breeding decisions.
I guess it's like I suppose in a simple terms as well, is that you've got a litre of milk and you want to get the value for that litre of milk, say, and every little component of that milk makes up your milk price. So if lactose is in there, which it is now, and it's there, and your cows are producing a high percentage of lactose by way of protein or whatever, that's where we should be focusing on. It's that value of per litre of milk which goes into milk solid. Am I reading that the right way, Paul?
Yeah. Using using protein as a proxy for solids non-fat is an approximation. Yeah. And so all we're doing is making the system more precise, and your litre of milk contains, roughly 5% fat, roughly 5% lactose, and roughly 4% protein. That 5% that is lactose ends up in a bag of milk powder every day of the week. The only thing we take out of the milk, if everything's working properly, is the water, right? So to the extent that it adds value to the system, lactose has a value. The real debates come when you get down to the level of, is the variability in lactose to protein ratio sufficiently material to justify the cost of introducing a payment parameter for it? And again, the board's view was, in the absence of a downside, that's the Abacus Bio work, the plus or minus 7 cents on average for 5% of farmers at either end of the bell curve was a sufficient motivation for them to think it was justified. So they went ahead and did it.
So those farmers out there just that are, say, they're the wrong side of the ledger of the 5%, that's not totally made up because of their lactose, is it? It's made up their protein to fat ratio, and
you can separate the effects of the differential values between fat and protein and lactose and other solids. So, if you're a high fat farmer with low lactose to protein ratio, for instance, at the moment you are doing quite well because the fat payment's 50% higher than the solids non-fat payment, but you might be getting a small reduction due to having a low lactose to protein ratio. But you can figure it out. And we at the end of May we announced the milk payment parameters, and we issue a couple of fact sheets that outline what those parameters are. It was an interesting exercise. I had to dust off my 5th form algebra to be able to, and it was a long time ago.
Not 70 years ago, I apologise. I meant in the mid-70s, my God, yeah.
I'll let you off.
Thanks, mate.
Yeah, you can sit down and work it out, but just to put that into context, I've had one query in the last 8 years about value component ratio, which historically has defined the ratio of value between fat and protein from farmers. One in 8 years. So my read is that there are other things to be worried about.
Yeah. Any questions out there? Please type them in. No one seems to want to type anything. Oh, that's a good sign, though, I reckon. So, just any more slides, or?
Oh, no, I think it might just about be there. No, look at that.
Look at that. Okay.
Just blank.
Just blank. Okay. So, yeah, I guess you and I've tried to sum things up, but for you going forward, this is implemented now, Paul. After 12 months, will there be, or 2 years, will there be a review on this, how it's gone? Will there be any tweaking? Do you think you'd tweak it and go, well, it's actually we've underpaid it or overpaid it, or you look at that bell curve, etc. I know we're only talking minimal cents here, but will there be a review on it?
Yeah, so the payment was formally implemented on the 1st of June, and it will appear for the first time on June paid July statements, which is today or tomorrow to anybody who supplies milk in June. And of course, there are an awful lot of people who don't. I seem to recall milking cows in the frost was not an enjoyable pastime. Yeah, so we'll progressively see farmers exposed to lactose being itemised on their statements over the next 3 months. The project will remain active for that time period. In terms of the assessment of the value, the mechanism for assessing the value of lactose is agreed internally, but it does change. And what we've seen over the last 12 months in particular is that lactose values on international markets have effectively doubled. And so we will see an increase in the value of lactose over the next 3 years. We try and smooth out violent changes in component valuation by taking a 3-year rolling average backward looking of the value of the commodities that inform the milk price. So the fat values, the protein values, and now the lactose values are done on a 3-year rolling average. So it takes a little bit of time for increases in value to flow through. It also takes a little bit of time for decreases to flow through. But we're trying to, again, for the purposes of breeding, responding to a noisy signal is virtually impossible, right? There's a little bit of time between a price signal being sent and a response in terms of breeding behaviours. So to have a really noisy signal would just not be helpful.
No, but I guess, yeah, I'm hearing you. But I guess now that you're paying it, that all of our members out there, and I'm talking with the Holstein Friesian hat on, we'll be looking at their lactose payments, and I guess it's a little challenging for us as a breed society that we can gather some of that information just to see where our members are sitting. And if we're at the top end of it, we'll be singing from the rafters, you know. So that's what about promoting our breed and etc. So yeah. Any questions for Paul before we wrap this webinar up? Everyone's probably rushed out and started doing a calving check, but on behalf of Holstein Friesian New Zealand, Paul, we thank you very much for your time this evening and giving us a very enlightening and descriptive, I really mean that, on the lactose payment, which is the farm gate milk price, how it was altered to increase the payment of lactose in there. Also why it was introduced and why now. So very, 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 very formative. Again, from Holstein Friesian New Zealand, and for our people out there that have been listening in this evening, we thank you very much for taking some time out of your busy schedule. Love the Holstein Friesian cows in the background, so well done. And just to everyone out there, take care. Calving's on lots of people's doorsteps now, and all the best for the new season. But remember, not only keep a close eye on your animals, but keep a close eye on your fellow neighbours and your friends, etc., because stress levels do get high and everyone needs to be looking after each other. So all the best for the coming calving folks out there. And again, thank you, Paul.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Cheers, man. Thank you very much.
Yeah.